Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. Thank you very much for joining me once again. You are always most welcome. Well, today, a bit of a sad one I'm afraid. Many of you will have probably seen a couple of weeks ago, at the end of May, that we lost our great Falklands War hero, Nigel Sharkey Ward. Sharky actually, I'll get into more detail later, but basically he apparently suffered a suspected heart attack at age 80, and he died at his home with his pet dog by his side, as is reported by his family. Now, many of you will know that I'm a huge fan of this individual, and I previously, as I've got this screen up, I'll show you now. I previously had, I've actually got a few photos, just a very small number here. I'll zoom you in again, but I'm a big fan of Sharkey Ward. I always have been. Read his book, which we'll talk about some more in a minute. I'm also going to read you a particularly good obituary, which literally, his obituary in the Times, which literally moved me to tears. I read it yesterday evening at the time of filming this, and I'd had a couple of drinks, and I was actually quite emotional when I finished reading it, because he had a difficult life in the end, and I'll explain why in a moment. Life got more difficult for him after he left the service of the Royal Navy. We'll come to that in a second. In the meantime, I'm going to zoom in some of these images that I think many of you will recall from the Falklands War era, the South Atlantic in 1982. Here we've got one of the Sea Harriers I think he flew, which was Treble Zero, although he didn't get any kills with that. There are two aircraft is synonymous, where this is one of them, 006, and this is the Montenegro, which was allegedly was the nickname given by the Argentine Air Force to the Sea Harriers, because they were this very dark colour and appeared suddenly and very worryingly from their point of view out of nowhere, and would bring death and destruction upon their Air Force, of course, who were attacking the Falklands. This aircraft, many of you will know, as it shows here, it shot down a Pucara, a Hercules and a Canberra. Sharkey Ward, in Sharkey Ward's hands. With the other plane, he actually shot down, I'm actually thinking of the Canberra. I'm not sure about this Canberra. I'm not sure about that. I think that should actually be a Dagger. I think there's a small mistake been made, because the other aircraft was 004, the one that I have pictured, or depicted I should say, with the kinetic Sea Harrier, which everybody knows about. I'm not going to go on about that today, it's not appropriate, but I ended up with a very nice model of Sharky's aircraft in which he downed a Dagger. Sharky, long after his service here, you can see that he posed for this artwork that was done. I think he was quite impressed with that one. And you can see here, taken from a photograph basically during the Falklands campaign. And there's also a bust you can get from Mr. Military, I think they're called Mr. Military Models. You can get this bust in 9th scale, which is very impressive, as I think you'll agree. A very good likeness to Sharky, it has to be said. There's the man himself, of course, on HMS Invincible, just before the campaign started. In fact, I think that was probably taken late 81, early 82, because you can tell they haven't repainted the Sea Harriers yet. And there's the bust again, the full bust, which is quite impressive. So, as I mentioned, I'll put that away. I'll bring that back in a second, and I'll read the obituary, which will take a little time, and I think, but trust me, is worth hearing, because I think you'll be quite surprised by what you hear. I certainly was. I famously, perhaps famously, I'll move Sharky's picture here. This is obviously the one you've just seen, the one that's quite well known of him on the Invincible. We'll get rid of that now and make a bit of room here. But Sharky, of course, wrote a couple of books, Her Majesty's Loyal Top Gun, and of course the Sea Harrier over the Falklands, which I have reviewed, amongst two other books, including Dave Ward's book and the Roland White Harrier 809 book. Dave Morgan's book was, of course, Hostile Skies, and his account. Sharkey Ward's account is a bit bigger and quite dramatic. Talks about, it's quite controversial, of course. It says here the controversial account of what really happened in the skies of the South Atlantic. This is an absolute must read for anyone who is interested in military aviation, and especially in wartime. In my review, I went into great. I'm not going to re-go over old ground about the review, because I'll put you a link probably over here for that, and no, probably there's also the Falklands montage. I'll probably put a link for that sort of over here, so you can just click on it at the end. But the Sharkey Ward book is a remarkable piece of factual, autobiographical material. Basically, his account of his early career and then going straight into the Falklands campaign and all the difficulties and the challenges that it faced. Now, if ever there was a man who exemplified British fortitude, Sharkey Ward would be right up there, frankly, with in terms of his very dogmatic, tenacious character. He was right up there with Winston Churchill in terms of never say die, not a man easy to beat. Even psychologically, a very strong character. Although you'll learn later that he did face a lot of challenges later in his life. But a wonderful leader of men. Anyone who's read this book, and I can't recommend this one highly enough. If you only read one book about the Falklands, read this, because it's so good in its detail and how he was able, and his team on the Invincible were able to get the most out of their equipment. There was a lot of controversy about the Blue Fox radar, which other pilots felt was inadequate, and it wasn't cutting edge perhaps for its day, but used in the right way at the right time could be very effective, and Sharkey Ward certainly got the most out of it. And he was dramatically successful, and he got at least 3 kills, as we mentioned. He was an exponent and a great sort of salesman almost for the Sea Harrier. He absolutely believed in it totally. And I actually learned, and I don't know if it mentions it in the obituary we'll get into in a minute. But I know that he famously did this. Another thing I'll put a link to. He famously did this stunt on Pebble Mill at 1, the British lunchtime TV sort of magazine programme that we used to have on in the 70s. And he landed his Sea Harrier basically on the back lawn of Pebble Mill. And apparently, and I didn't know this until just yesterday, apparently that was because the RAF turned down the offer to land one of their Harriers because they thought it was too dangerous and impossible. And he said, "Oh, nonsense! I can do that." And he famously did this, and it's all, as you'll see, it's all on camera. So he obviously went down to the Falklands were invaded, last Malvinas Islands. You will probably know the stories already about he famously got into a dogfight with his dagger and he shot it. I think this is the one where he shot where I think the Sidewinder missile actually had run out of fuel, but it was going so fast and it had such an overspeed on the Mirage, because they travelled at Mach 3 to Mach 4, these things, that it still caught the dagger. Mirage dagger. Dagger is a version of the Mirage, Israeli version, and it was sold to Argentina. And he shot it down, even though the thing had run out of fuel, went up the exhaust pipe. Incredible story. And of course he shot up this Pucara, Carlos Tomba's Pucara, which again I'll talk about in great detail in the other video. And there was a lot of daring do. I mean, he's not alone in that. Of course, you had all these other guys, Andy Old and Soapy Watson, and so I can't remember all the names, but there's so many of these guys that with Dave Morgan, of course, they were all heroes, every one of them, no question. And they made the difference. They made the operation to recover the Falkland Islands for the British government possible. Without those Sea Harrier pilots, they couldn't have done it. It would have been impossible without the air cover that was so urgently needed, and they only had 21 aircraft when they sailed down there. And I think on Sharky's aircraft, I think they had 9 from memory. So they were really thin on the ground. And some of his colleagues were lost with accidents and things. And yeah, it's a book that will amaze you, frankly. These things were not easy to fly. They were not easy to handle. Today the F-35. Those that know say it's a piece of cake because all the computers do most of the most difficult aviation work. And this was not the case with the Harrier. It required incredible skills. And Sharkey Ward led his men with a vigour and a courage and a determination to do their job and to do their duty with such strength. Exactly like someone like Douglas Bader, you know, or any of these other heroes. You know, you could argue Adolf Galland on the German side in World War II was the same. They had that grit. They were brilliant, skillful, super skillful pilots, and they knew what they were doing. And he was one of those, that incredible breed of men who really did have not only the belief in his cause, the skill to carry out his mission, but in Sharky's case, and this is what makes him a little bit different, he was not above remonstrating and disagreeing with his senior commanders when he knew that they were wrong about strategy or tactics. And of course this got him into a lot of trouble, as we know. And I say, I'm not going to go into all that now. I'll read out, I'm going to do the obituary in a second. I think that you'll enjoy that when you hear it. I'm going to zoom in on my Sea Harrier because it's Sharky's 004. I mentioned this is the one that shot down the Dagger. Sorry if you ignore the, I put the book there, we don't want the ICM logo today. So yeah, here's the Sea Harrier, which I built last year, of course. Everybody knows about that one. And yeah, and I'm so pleased that I did that now, and I did the Sharkey Ward figure. Here he is. I'll bring him in a bit closer. It's not quite to the standard of that big bust we just saw, of course, but I was very pleased with it. I thought that this is the Aero bonus figure, by the way, which you can pick up for around about £10 plus shipping, thereabouts, or equivalent price in your own local territories. And there's something I didn't know, by the way, that Sharkey Ward, I'm quite pleased that I got his beard there, but something I didn't know about Sharkey was that a couple of things really. One was that his father was an aviator in the Royal Air Force, although he was very sceptical about the Royal Air Force, or the light blue as he used to call them. He had a lot of issues with the RAF and made them known. But his father was an aviator end of World War II, and Sharkey was born. Sorry, it was during World War II, I should say. Sharkey was born in Canada, at Medicine Hat in Canada, which I didn't know. While his father was stationed there at the local airfield, so that's something quite interesting. And you know, he basically followed his father's footsteps, and his son also followed in his footsteps. We'll get into that in a second. His son Kris, Christian with a K. But Sharky's adventures in the Falklands are really not to be missed, and you know, if you're not the book reading type, and I'm not that great at reading books, I'm quite a slow reader, so I just get the audio book, and you can be listening to that, exactly what I did, whilst you are modelling or cleaning the car or mowing the lawn or whatever you're doing. It's fine, and you can enjoy it, you know, just the same. It's definitely worth a listen. Sharky was very he wanted the Sea Harriers in the Falklands to be kept purely for air defence and be dogfighting, you know, to destroy the enemy's air force and degrade their capability to damage the task force and the British Army on the ground. And there were obviously some of these missions where they were tasked to do bombing runs, and he was very resistant to this because he felt that this was wasting and risking resources that were so few on the ground, or on the sea, if you pardon the pun. And he thought that was fine for the RAF aircraft because that's what they were designed for, and he didn't believe the Sea Harrier should have done that. So that brought him into conflict. He also had a big conflict famously with Rear Admiral Sandy Woodward, of course, who was the leader of the task force, in charge of the task force, commander. I understand that in later years that they had this spat where he's quite brutal toward Woodward in his book, and Woodward, who's an ex-submarine commander, he didn't feel he was right. I think Sharkey thought Woodward wasn't the right man, but the two of them had this sort of public spat, but they actually made up and became quite good friends later on. It's reminds me a lot, when I heard this, reminds me of the story I told you all, those of you that watched my Ayrton Senna versus Prost videos. Very similar. Once they were no longer in conflict or in competition or you know, in the same space, they actually saw eye to eye far better, understood each other's position far better, and became quite good pals. So that just shows you, just like Prost and Senna, they were going that way, weren't they? But anyway, I digress. But back to Sharky. But yeah, he had a lot of reservations about the way the campaign was run. He felt that when the campaign was they finally got the victory, that the RAF took far too much credit, and he was very sceptical about, scathing in fact, about the celebrations afterwards, where the Royal Navy pilots were not even invited to the celebrations, and the RAF took all the glory, which was very strange if you think about it, because the RAF's contribution was relatively small during the campaign itself. And then since the end of the hostilities, of course, he was very against this plan for Mount Pleasant, the new airfield and defence base complex. He felt that that was a risky venture, in that it's a long runway which would enable a repeat of the invasion, and this time would enable Argentina to potentially have their fast jets readily available, which they weren't at Port Stanley because the runway was too short. So yeah, he was very sceptical, and felt that what they should have had was just several airfields that only Sea Harriers could operate from, or Sea Harriers or RAF Harriers, and not enable it for these big high-speed Mach 2 fast jets. I think that he's right and he's wrong. I'm not trying to contradict him, because he knows a lot more about it than I do, let's be honest. But I think that he was wrong in the sense that putting the Typhoons in there, it means that Argentina has really got no chance whatsoever of retaking the Falklands. But the trouble is, there's only 2 or 3 of them, so he's kind of also right, because if they were to be knocked out, then it would be wide open. So you can see where he was coming from. He wanted to guarantee and make it such that without Harriers, that nobody basically without Harriers or F-35s would be able to take the Falklands again. Although you could argue Argentina could buy the F-35, making that argument obsolete. But there we go. I cannot commend that book to you enough. It's nail biting. It's astonishing, some of the combat descriptions of combat that he gives. And it just takes you on an absolute white knuckle roller coaster ride through the Falklands aerial combat campaign in a way that the other books get close to, but not quite as grittily. So I very strongly recommend you would look at that book, and there we go. Anyway, I'm now going to go on to the Times obituary. So this is from the Times from a week or 2 ago, and I'm going to read it. I was very impressed by this, much better than your average type of obituary that we often get. So I'm going to show you 1 or 2 of the photos. It's a bit longer as well, so I hope you'll bear with me. Just sit back and have a listen to this. So they say, obituary, Commander Sharkey Ward. Obituary, pilot who played a decisive role in the Falklands. And I'm just going to toast Commander Ward. And I'm just going to quote you under that photograph. It says, Rear Admiral Sandy Woodward wrote, if Sharkey Ward had not disobeyed orders, he would have lost the Falklands War. Here's to Sharkey. I'm just going to drink tea. I'm going to have a little sip at the end as well. I'm having some of we're on the Caribbean cask. This is the Macallan Glenkinchie. No, I've got it wrong. My brain's gone. It's the Caribbean cask from. It doesn't matter anyway. It'll come back to me in a sec. Don't worry. Cheers. It's the best stuff, I can assure you. Single malt. Rest in peace, Sharky. Let's get into this though, because that sums it up. If Rear Admiral Woodward is now saying that, I think he's understanding. He was a maverick and a renegade, but in a good way. And you need people like that. And Bard was like that. So, enough of me. Let's read you what it says. On the morning of May the 21st, 1982, Lieutenant Commander Nigel Sharkey Ward was flying his Sea Harrier low over San Carlos Bay as British forces were landing on the west coast of Argentine-occupied East Falkland. Under a clear blue sky, he flew in battle formation side by side, 2 miles apart with Lieutenant Steve Thomas, descending from the northeast and setting up a low-level racetrack patrol in a wide, shallow valley, helping to protect the British ships below him. At the southerly end of the track, as the 2 pilots completed their turns, Ward, as he recalled in an interview later, spotted 2 triangular shapes approaching down the far side of the valley under the hills from the west. These objects were daggers, the Israeli version of the French Mirage fighter bomber, operated by the Argentine Air Force, and they were moving very fast. Ward levelled out his turn and pointed directly at them, increasing power to full throttle and alerting Thomas to the presence of the enemy jets. "My voice was so excited and garbled that Steve could not understand a word," said Ward later. He flew between the Argentine aircraft, lower than the leader and higher than the number 2, as they flashed past his cockpit. He expected the enemy jets to press onto their target. However, in the face of the Harriers, the daggers turned for home immediately. But it was too late. Thomas came up behind the Argentine jet and destroyed 2 of them with the Sidewinder missile. Ward then shot down a 3rd, which entered the flight from the north, as he found out later, and had been firing at him, little did he know. "Adrenaline running high, I glanced round to check the sky about me," said Ward. "Flashing underneath me and just to my right was the beautiful green and brown camouflage of the 3rd dagger. I broke right and down towards the aircraft's tail, found the jet exhaust with my Sidewinder lock and released the missile. It reached its target very quickly and the dagger disappeared in a great ball of flame. The engagement had lasted for roughly a minute, and although it happened incredibly fast, in my mind it was all registered as a spectacular slow motion show." Ward was commander of 801 Naval Air Squadron, which was based on HMS Invincible. The aircraft carrier was one of 2, the other was the task force flagship HMS Hermes. Sent to the South Atlantic after the junta in Buenos Aires had ordered the invasion of the Falklands, a British territory, and took control of it in the 2nd of April 1982. A pugnacious and aggressive fighter pilot, Ward was often compared to Douglas Bader, there you go, they've said it, one of the heroes of the Battle of Britain, and Albert Ball, one of the great aces of World War I. Like them, he was courageous and utterly fearless. He was also a fine squadron commander with great strategic vision. He had been involved in the development of the Sea Harrier jet, a naval version of the revolutionary jump jet, and played an important role in ensuring that it was highly capable in air-to-air combat. By the time 801 Squadron was sent to the South Atlantic, his pilots and their aircraft were more than a match for the Argentinian opposition. On the 1st of May, their very first day of action, they demonstrated their deadly prowess, shooting down 2 Mirages and a Canberra. Ward was a demanding leader who feared absolutely nobody in authority and was quite prepared to confront his own side as well. He challenged Rear Admiral Sandy Woodward, commander of the task force, over his conduct of the air war and disobeyed directives from the flagship. In short, he fought the conflict in his own way. His behaviour followed a rebellious pattern that marked his life and paid off. As a child, he was the most caned boy at Reading School, but still became the head boy. After passing through operational flying training with distinction, Ward was court-martialed in 1969 for an exhilarating flight in a Sea Vixen at extremely low level over the north coast of Devon and Cornwall. I remember reading this in the book. Members, he called them grockles, the public, grockles. Members of the public rushed to complain and one newspaper ran the story, "Terror Pilot Frightens Children." He received a formal reprimand but was soon selected as an air warfare instructor. Ward was also awarded the Air Force Cross after helping develop the Harrier into the Sea Harrier. He was posted to the Ministry of Defence in 1976 as the Naval Staff Officer responsible for developing and production of the Sea Harrier. The modification from the already well-proven ground attack Harrier was quite a design masterpiece, said Ward, who was involved in the project for 3 years. In an interview with the aviation magazine Hush Kit, he said, "It included a raised cockpit, a superbly, albeit physically tiny, monopulse radar, the Blue Fox, a very reliable inertial standard navigation system and a very user-friendly head-up display weapons aiming system, including a hotline gun sight. The only guidance I received from my director was that if I wished to spend more than £5 million over and above the agreed project cost, then I should clear it with him. Crumbs. Okay. Well, there was no need, he says. It was the first UK fighter jet programme in history to be on cost and on time. Ward later commanded the squadron that took the Sea Harrier into the Top Gun trials with American F-5E Tigers and F-15E Eagles. The Harrier dominated the exercise and was delivered to British naval squadrons in 1979, 3 years before the Falklands conflict. Ward was awarded the Air Force Cross for his service during this period. In a publicity stunt in autumn 1979, he landed the new jump jet at the BBC's Pebble Mill studios in the centre of Birmingham after the RAF had declined to perform the manoeuvre, saying it was too dangerous. He was soon known as Mr. Sea Harrier. And there's a photo here. There's a photo here I'm going to share with you because this is one I haven't got in my collection. So let's just zoom you in. This is him with his. Some of you may know some of these guys, and I know that Sophie Watson's there and a couple of others that are quite well known. So forgive me that I don't recognise them. I'm not so familiar with the other guys, but I think it's worthy that they are shown here. And this is on during the campaign, when I think it's just before the campaign, when they've just got their new paint job. So you can see there he's got these brilliant engineers, which he talks about. He gives full credit to these guys for being brilliant mechanics and engineers, servicing the Harriers and repairing them after battle damage. And they're all there. What a fantastic squad, and there he is in the middle. Good old Sharky. Anyway, on with the show. Because this is just... I think this is one of the best obituaries I've ever read, because I've learned so much from it I didn't know before. So let's carry on. It goes on to say, in the Falklands his experience was quite invaluable, but sometimes a bit divisive. While 801 Squadron flourished with the aircraft in Invincible, 800 Squadron in Hermes was apparently less confident with their equipment. They didn't know how to use the radar properly or with the navigation computer, Ward said in an interview with the Imperial War Museum in 1986. They weren't at the same professional standard, and this came out before the Falklands. Even by the measures of inter-squadron rivalry, this was rather harsh. But Ward stuck to his opinion and enlarged on it after the conflict. He said he had offered to share his experience, but was rebuffed. I remember in return, Ward was accused of bullshitting, and it was Andy Old of 800 Squadron who said that. I don't know if it says this here, but I know from the book it was Andy Old, the leader of 800 Squadron. They didn't really hit it off. Influenced by the views of 800 Squadron on board his own ship, Sandy Woodward restricted the use of the Blue Fox radar and ordered the Harrier squadrons to perform combat air patrols at higher level. Now this is a big theme in the book, which he complains about quite bitterly, because at a higher level they're less effective. Anyway, both these directives were ignored by Sharkey Ward. His squadron flew at low level, which enabled them to intercept enemy aircraft before they attacked the British ships. He made extensive use of the radar, which he claimed worked well and deterred the Argentinians when they could see that it was on. They got a radar bounce. When they picked up signals from the Harrier's radar, they then held back and avoided the British aircraft. Indeed, the Argentinian pilots allegedly referred to the Harriers as La Muerte Negra, or the Black Death. Ward claimed that the sinking of HMS Arden and HMS Sheffield were both avoidable, and that the long-distance Vulcan raids on the runway at Port Stanley were unnecessary and ineffective. He believed that the airfield could have been destroyed by the Harriers flying at night, but the idea was dismissed, even though 801 Squadron had, without formal authorisation, completed a successful programme of night flying. Well, they did have a very bad accident at night where two actually crashed into each other in bad weather, killing both pilots. It's the biggest loss they suffered from Invincible. Ward flew more than 60 combat missions in the Falklands and shot down three of the 8 enemy aircraft destroyed by 801 Squadron, which is believed to have turned away more than 450 enemy attacks. He damaged another Argentine aircraft and was involved in several more kills. The unit lost 4 aircraft and 2 pilots, but none of them in air-to-air combat. So they lost the 2 I mentioned. They lost another one, was it Dave Braithwaite, was it? Where the plane skidded off because of the horrendous weather, pitch and swell of the ship, and it pitched over so much the plane slid off the deck and he had to eject. I talk about that in my other video, go and watch that. Ward was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his gallantry and devotion to duty. He was also made a Freeman of the City of London and a member of the Royal Aeronautical Society. Years later, Sandy Woodward wrote, "Sharkey Ward had not disobeyed his orders, we would have lost the Falklands War." Wow, I mean that's quite an admission, isn't it? Nigel David Ward was born in Medicine Hat in Alberta, Canada in 1943, the son of squadron leader John Ward, who was serving in the RAF in Canada, and his wife Marjorie. He had an elder brother Michael and a younger sister Anna. As with many naval personnel named Ward, he was also known as Sharky, after a 16th century pirate. I didn't know that. Okay. He changed his surname to McCartan Ward by deed poll in the 1990s in honour of his father's Irish ancestry. I didn't know that either. The family returned to Britain by sea in 1944, and Ward suffered from a serious lung condition at the age of 5 and was confined to a hospital bed for a year. He also started to thrive after spending 3 years in Pakistan after his father was posted to RAF Moripur in Karachi, where his health improved thanks to the dry climate. In 1954 he was sent to the Reading School in Berkshire. There he captained the first 15 and learned to fly the Tiger Moth on an RAF scholarship. Here he starts. Okay, he first set foot on an aircraft carrier as a teenager during a visit with his father. I couldn't get my head around how these huge glistening jet aircraft on show for the cocktail party could operate from such a tiny small deck. He said, "I knew then what I wanted to do." He was obviously a daredevil, wasn't he? That's putting it mildly. He trained at the Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth, played rugby, took charge of the Tiger Moth Flying Club, and in his own words, had a wild year as a midshipman in the West Indies and a roller coaster ride as a navigator on minesweepers in Hong Kong. I mean, there's a story, I'm just going off camber here. There's a story in the book about when he was a youngster training on Phantoms, and they went to some drunken night out driving a Cortina and crashed this Cortina into a field. Drunken driving, not very good. I think he got court-martial or threatened with a court-martial, and he didn't do it again. He was very contemptuous of many rules, and his philosophy was quite simply work hard and play hard. Not a bad philosophy, really. He later flew Phantoms from HMS Ark Royal with 892 Squadron and served as a nuclear intelligence officer in Norway for 2 years before returning to his squadron. He was given command of 801 Squadron in 1981. This is where it gets a bit tricky. Ward's private life was complicated. He met his wife Alison Taylor, who was serving in the Women's Royal Naval Service in 1971. He married her at Gaddesby in Leicester that year. Quite soon. The couple had 2 sons, Christian, who also became a distinguished naval fighter pilot and served in Afghanistan, and Ashton, who founded a new headhunting firm, but they divorced in 1986. He is survived by both Alison and Ashton. That's his wife and his son, obviously. Christian took... This is where it gets really quite difficult now. Christian took his own life, aged 45 years of age, after suffering from combat-related PTSD. And there's a separate obituary. He died in December 2018. His death hugely affected Sharkey Ward. I just want to say a word about Christian. There's some photographs I'll show you. I'll show you now, because it starts off showing those early doors, and he was clearly, definitely, again, another chip off the old block. Here he is. He even looks like his father. Remarkably, looks quite like him. Here they are. They've just been up in a Harrier T4, I think it is, isn't it? The two of them, Christian on the left and Sharky on the right. Now Christian actually, to his great credit, he was in the Harrier force in the RAF, I think he was, wasn't he? And he was it the RAF? I'm just going to check that. Just want to make sure I get my facts correct here. Just bear with me 1 second. Because yeah, it's the Royal Air Force. It's the Royal Air Force. Okay, so sorry, just zoom you back. But Christian was the Harrier, you remember, was retired in 2011. Most people feel that was terribly premature by about 5 to 6 years at least. Christian Ward spoke up in front when David Cameron went to visit RAF Cottesmore, I think it was, and he spoke up when he was sort of any questions, you know, and he said, "Sir," to David Cameron, he said, "Sir, what am I supposed to do now? You've just made my entire career obsolete." And Cameron was like, "Oh yes, but we need to do this." Well, of course, at the time, this was not a good decision by the politicians. Like so many others before it, an erroneous decision. This is when we didn't have any aircraft carriers. You know, it's only recently we've got the new aircraft carriers. So we had no vertical takeoff, we had no maritime fighter jets of any kind for about six or 7 years. So you can understand the anger, and Christian was very professional in the way he tackled this, but he actually grilled Cameron over this, and apparently Cameron later said to him, I hear you, at the end of the meeting. He had a one-to-one with him and it was overheard. But clearly poor Christian, you know, he had a tough time. He went to work for Jet 2, I don't know if he mentions that here, but he went to work for Jet 2, the holding company, as a pilot. Well, when you've been a combat pilot, that's like driving, it's basically like, you know, Lewis Hamilton driving the local school bus a few weeks later. That's effective to what it is, you know. Anyway, enough of me, I diverge. So poor Christian, he was, this obviously affected Sharky quite badly, you know, and it's amazing that, I knew about Christian's death, but I didn't know the details. I thought he'd been killed in a car crash. I know he died very suddenly. So I was quite shocked when I read that he'd taken his own life. That was quite shocking and very sad. Anyway, after leaving the Navy in 1985, Sharky set up his own company, Defence Analysts, which employed former members of the Special Forces to defend oil tankers during the Iran-Iraq War. Quite useful today with the Houthis in Yemen, wouldn't it? He then moved to Turkey, where he started to build a hotel and married a local woman, Semiha Mutula, in Marmaris. Both ventures, though, eventually failed. And there is a picture of Sharky here at Yeovilton, which I'm going to share with you. Does it say when? Doesn't say when. I'm guessing that was about roughly 10 years ago, thereabouts. In front of one of the Sea Harriers. It goes on. I'm going to make sure it doesn't fall out. It goes on to say, in 1994, he moved to St George's in Grenada, after rescuing an English woman, Abby May, from an unhappy marriage to a Turkish man, which involved an infamous bandit in the getaway. Only Sharkey Ward would you read something like this about. His marriage to her, though, did not last. His fourth and final wife was a lady called Mary Egan. The union was described as brief. He was quite a difficult character, Sharky. Perhaps not that you could argue if you wanted to be critical of him, and we're not trying to do that here today, but perhaps he wasn't the strongest team player, so yeah, you can imagine that could cause issues. Anyway, listen to this. Sharky had a generous spirit which was not always appreciated by those who didn't know him, and Ward spent much of his later life helping Grenadians who had fallen on hard times, and also rescuing badly treated dogs, including a dying puppy found outside a church. He nurtured the dog back to full health and named him Vicar. It's a nice story, isn't it? As a boy, he had listened to his father, a fine singer, and become a great fan of the Three Tenors, whose music could often be heard from his balcony in Grenada as he drank rum and coke on the balcony. He wrote 3 books: an autobiography, Sea Harrier over the Falklands, which is the one I've discussed and reviewed, Her Majesty's Top Gun, which is basically kind of excerpts and a bit of a mix and match from that book, and also The Decline of the Royal Navy, which he wrote in 2020, which, yeah, well, that's understandable because I think there's nobody's going to argue with what he's put in that book. Most recently, he also wrote How Strategic Air Power Has Challenged the World Order, and was published just a couple of months ago in 2024. I might get that. Which he wrote with Dr. Anthony Wells, a specialist in naval intelligence. Ward argued that governments spent far too much time paying lip service to naval aviation, meanwhile wasting billions on land-based fighters and bombers for the Royal Air Force. Long after leaving the Navy, he became a close friend with Sandy Woodward and campaigned with him for a change in defence strategy. Needless to say, the RAF regarded him with some suspicion. Oh dear. Finally, asked by an interviewer some years ago what he thought would be his epitaph, Ward simply replied, I think it should probably be, thank God he lived, thank he's gone. Commander Nigel Sharkey Ward, DSC, AFC, naval fighter pilot, was born on the 22nd of September 1943 and died of a suspected heart attack on the 17th of May 2024, aged 80. Cheers, Sharky. Rest in peace. No country ever had a more loyal servant than you. Here's to Sharky. Cheers. And the whiskey, by the way, is the Glenlivet Caribbean Reserve, so I didn't remember. Well, there's not much else I can say, really. I didn't want to go over too much old ground, but I thought that was an excellent obituary, much better than they usually are. I've read many of them for Sharky, and they've all been a bit poor, really. That was very, very good. I do feel slightly emotional myself, especially the story about his son. He only had one son initially, and then of course he had the second. But he lost Christian, the one son that was a fighter pilot, and you could see the joy when they went out. And there's several photographs of when they went out on that sort of training flight together. It must have really had broken his heart, I think, losing his son in that way, and I think he had real problems, mental health problems, obviously, and couldn't find a new way. And I think that then in turn affected Sharky, and they just said basically that he died unexpectedly, had this heart attack, I think, and he died with his dog at his side. And yeah, I suppose there's worse ways to go, But I would just say this of him: not only was he one of the most impressive, allegedly certainly, because I didn't meet the man sadly, but clearly one of the most impressive servants of our nation in difficult times, in combat, in a war, but also a very strong servant and loyal, I wouldn't say obedient, that wouldn't be true, but certainly a loyal servant of the country in times of peace as well. And he really, you can see his heart was in the right place. He was focused, he was competent, and he was very, very courageous. And no armed forces in any country could ask for more. And it's particularly striking to me, Sharkey Ward was so respectful of his enemy in the shape of Argentina. He spoke at length about his respect for the enemy air force, and that he thought that they were easily the service. He almost had more respect for the Argentine Air Force than the Royal Air Force, because he waxed lyrical about the sheer courage. People like Carlos Tomba, who he shot down with his cannon. Tomba ejected literally in the last instant before he would have been killed. He hung on to his Pucara ground attack aircraft when it was on fire, and lumps of it were coming off. The ailerons were off. The wing was collapsing and on fire from its engine. And he just wouldn't give up. And Ward said, "What a brave man!" And of course they met after the war, I believe, and yeah, they had this reunion. So that was remarkable, and the fact that he was open to recognising that, you know, there were other people like him basically in the world. And with that, I'll leave it at that really. I can never do justice, me personally, can never do justice to somebody like that. An absolute boy's own hero, if ever there was one, you know. And he's a great loss, and I'm very glad that I chose my Sea Harrier to be his aircraft now. Very, very satisfied, and I did the little figure of him. I think that now takes on an even added greater significance for me. And I hope you'll all join me in raising a glass to Sharky. May he rest in peace. Thank you for your service to your country. And thanks for being such a brilliant character. Sharkey Ward. That's it from me. Bit of a sad one today. I'm a little bit choked up, and prior to sipping that I hadn't had anything to drink today. But it's a bit of a sad story, isn't it? I think in some respects, you know, Sharky deserved a little bit better than he got, and if you read the book, it's quite clear he wanted to be an aircraft carrier commander, and he never got that chance because he ruffled too many feathers, I'm afraid. And I guess that's the way it goes sometimes, you know. But it was impressive that Woodward came round to his way of thinking. I think is all you need to know about Sharky. And I think it's perhaps the best tribute that anybody could give us, that comment from Woodward. If he hadn't disobeyed his orders, they'd probably have lost the Falklands War. Wow. So I'd never read that before, and that really struck me yesterday when I read that. And the stories about his personal life just choked you up a bit, you know. So I think we all owe him a debt of gratitude, and I think may there be more people like him in that, you know, in whichever country you're in. Excuse me. That is the kind of person you want on your side, leading your effort. And if it's in a good cause as it was, all the better, all the better. Anyway, I'm going to have to stop now. So, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you found it interesting and moving. I know I did, and I think Sharky will be badly missed. Badly missed. Thank you for watching. I hope you all stay well, stay safe. Until next time, thanks for tuning in. Look after yourselves, and bye for now.